I'm going to be putting an emphasis on the book of 1st and 2nd Kings. 1st and 2nd Kings, and we're going to go through a series. I'm so glad this whiteboard is right here. I hope I got a little pen marker. I do. Okay. And so in going through and studying, I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking there's so many good references from the 1st and 2nd Kings that would be useful for us. So I started trying to think of those, and I was, okay, I got to tell you guys a story. It's a little side note right here. So I got to look for my side note. I wanted to do an exhaustive, pool from the Old Testament. I wanted all the names from the book of 1st and 2nd Kings, and then I was going to find every single one of those names in the New Testament and see where the two line up, so I can see exactly who it is that we have in the book of 1st and 2nd Kings that is found in the New Testament, right? That's a monumental task. So I went to my friend ChatGPT to get him to do some of his, muscle pulling. And I said, all right, ChatGPT, I need you to pull all the names from the book of 1st and 2nd Kings. And they said, I won't do that. It's too much work. It says it's very labor intensive. And I said, all right, how about just chapter 1? So it gives me 20 names. And I said, oh, that's impressive. Can you do it for all of 1st Kings? And ChatGPT said, oh, I'd be happy to. Okay? So spits out a document. Okay? So the first thing that they gave me was 20 names from the first chapter. The document that they sent me after that was only 70 names. Now, I know those numbers don't mean anything to you. The 70 names was like a few names in chapter 1, and then Solomon and the Lord, Solomon and the Lord, Solomon and the Lord for all the other chapters. That's all that it would do. That's like, you lazy, no good for nothing. But, the statement, trust but verify, you guys know what I'm talking about? Trust but verify. Like when somebody tells you something, yeah, sure, trust but verify. I don't do that at ChatGPT anymore. The first 20 names that they gave me, I went and I was looking through there. I was like, they're missing huge names. I counted 3 right off the bat when I was kind of going over the list. And I was like, man, okay, so I can't rely on these guys. I was really, really upset with that, thinking that, man, this could save me a lot of work. So I go to the internet and I said, surely some nerd out there has done this work before, right? You guys remember that story of this one guy who he was captured and he was put in prison, and so they're like, hey, what do you want? And they said, I just want a Bible. And for 3 years, he read the Bible cover to cover, cover to cover. And so they're like, dude, this guy must be really considering spiritual matters, and he might be on the right way. And so they asked him, hey, what'd you learn in the 3 years that you were studying the Bible? And he says, well, did you know that there are like 1,160 chapters, or so, just random facts like that. Like he was looking through it and combing through it for information rather than for that life-giving word of God that was given to us. I didn't want to be that guy. But I am that guy. That's the problem. Like I like doing that. I like going, did you guys know that Solomon shows up in so many verses in the Bible? And like that stuff tickles my fancy, right? Surely some other nerd out there is doing the same thing. And turns out there are. So I found one guy. He's his webpage is bibleask.org or .com or something like that. And he has a list of every man in both the Old and New Testaments. There's 2,003 entries in that. 2,003 entries. If you were to go through and just kind of like read all those names, it would take you forever just to read the names, not even the references. But he's included all the references and stuff like that. It's like, now we're getting somewhere. So what I did was I went through all the Old Testament names, and because they had references, I pulled out which ones was mentioned in the book of Kings. Bloop, stuck it over here. And then from that, I said, all right, now I want to match it up with anyone who's mentioned in the New Testament. Bloop, set it over here. There were 16 names. And I was like, okay, this doesn't feel right. because I'm a data guy, right? And anytime you look at data, you've got this intuition where you feel like, okay, I did this and I'm expecting this number and it's not. So I need to do a deep dive and see what I'm missing here, okay? This is what I found out. It says that I'm coming through, I'm looking. First of all, I looked at the list. Elijah wasn't in that list of people who are in the Old Testament, in the book of Kings, who are mentioned in the New Testament. Is Elijah mentioned in the New Testament? Absolutely. You guys remember in James? Who prayed for 3.5 years? It was Elijah. And James even says that. So I was like, okay, so this data is messed up. Either that or my formula is messed up. I double check my formulas. My formulas are good because that's what I do, right? But that's messed up. Turns out they didn't have Elijah in the list of Old New Testament guys at all. It's like, oh man, now I can't trust this data. And I don't. Because as I was going through the Old Testament list, I found out a guy named Mark was in the Old Testament. And I was like, I've never read Mark in the Old Testament, right? And it was found in 1 Kings. Why don't you guys turn with me over to 1 Kings? This is good stuff. 1 Kings chapter 20. It's like Mark in 1 Kings chapter 20. Was he like a soldier? I've never heard this guy before. So 1 Kings chapter 20, verse 7. I'm in 2 Kings. I'm sorry. Give me a second. 1 Kings chapter 20, verse 7. You guys don't see Mark in there, right? 1 Kings chapter 20, verse 7. It says, Then the king of Israel called all the elders of the land and said, Please observe and see how this man is looking for trouble. For he sent to me for my wives and my children, my silver and my gold, and I did not refuse him. Okay, it's not in there. There's no Mark. There's not even a name in there, right? It's just the king of Israel. So this list that I got from Bible Ask turns out was a list of all names found in the King James Version. So I went to the King James Version to look, see if there's Mark. Here's what the King James Version says. You're just going to have to listen to me. Then the king of Israel called all the elders of the land and said, Mark, I pray you, and see how this man seeketh mischief. For he sent unto me for my wives and for my children, for my silver and for my gold, and I denied him not. Mark happens to be capitalized right there in the King James Version. So he said, well, capital Mark must be a name. Boom. But he appears 20 times in the Old Testament. I found a couple of examples, okay? Genesis chapter 4. You don't have to turn there, but I'll read you the King James. This is Cain and Abel. The Lord said unto him, Therefore whoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any man find him, should kill him. So my imaginative brain was like, I know a guy named Mark. Okay, he was in the military. He's not a killer, okay? This guy he's probably watching. I better watch what I'm saying about him. But I imagine, the Lord setting a guy named Mark upon Cain. Nope. Another one, 1 Samuel 20:20. And I will shoot 3 arrows on the side thereof, as though I shot at a mark. I thought that was really funny because, you can imagine Mark trying to dodge arrows. Another one found in 1 Kings. The prophet came to the king of Israel and said to him, Go, strengthen thyself and Mark, and see what thou doest. For at the return of the year, the king of Syria will come upon against thee. That one made me laugh. I'm sitting in my room by myself, doing my spreadsheets, and I see that verse, and I'm like, Mark does need to exercise a little bit more. But we're going to end it with Psalm 37:37. Mark the perfect man, and behold the upright, for the end of that man is peace. That's the only one that happens to have the same wording in the New American Standard. It says, Mark the blameless man. And so I was like, Mark would appreciate me saying that. So he is a really good guy. But that ain't a name. You see what I'm saying? That's not supposed to be a name, but it was a name found in my list. And I was like, man, this data is skewed. So I scrapped all that. The reason why I went through such lengths is because I wanted to be exhaustive in all of the references from Kings that we find in the New Testament, because I think those are very valuable. So I went back to my old trusty concordance, and I've got not an exhaustive list, but I've got a pretty good list, okay? But we want to look at Kings for several reasons. It's not as many New Testament references as I thought, but the book of Kings is a very pivotal book in the Bible. It kind of pulls the whole Bible together. It gives you all that history from Genesis leading up to the Kings and introducing us to some giant themes like the kingdoms. The priests is mentioned in it, the building of the temple. You know, we got a lot of the building of the tabernacle back in Exodus and the Pentateuch, but Solomon is building the real temple, the one that God is commanding all the people to come back to. There's a lot of prophets that made their debut there, and we got to read a lot of them. It covers about 400 years of history, and I think it's kind of poetic that it starts off with David dying, giving the kingdom to Solomon, and Solomon building the temple. And the way that it ends is that same temple is being destroyed because in the 400 years Israel left God, and that gets taken out of the way. But it's setting us up for a rebuilding of the true temple of God, right? And so that's pretty exciting. One fun fact is, so I always wondered, it's called the Book of Kings. And why do you think it's called the Book of Kings? Well, because it mentions a bunch of kings. But really, the kings aren't the focal point of the book, right? There's a Syriac version that titled these books, The Book of the Kings Who Flourished Among the Hebrews, containing also the history of the prophets who flourished in their times. That was the title of those books in that particular Bible. I'm glad that didn't come over. It was actually called Kingdoms in the Septuagint. And so 1st and 2nd Kings was actually 3rd and 4th Kingdoms, because the Kingdoms 1 and 2 were 1st and 2nd Samuel. And then the Chronicles have always been Chronicles. So anyway, let's get into the meat of today's lesson. I was going to give you guys some names, some big names from the Book of Kings, and we're just kind of go and talk over what it is that was so valuable about these names as far as the New Testament references go, okay? So, well, actually, why don't I start and leave it to you guys? Can you guys think of names from people in 1st and 2nd Kings, or events that happen in 1st and 2nd Kings that would be valuable for us to learn and remember? Search in your data bank. So 1st and 2nd Kings, right after David, before Jesus. What do you guys got?
You're not necessarily asking for repeated in the New Testament.
No, just a name. Oh. Yep, just any name. Do you guys remember any stories of people or places that may have been mentioned in the New Testament? What do you think? Huh? Solomon. I was hoping someone would start off with that one because I've already said it once. But yeah, Solomon is a big one. Now, he is mentioned in the New Testament, and but it doesn't say much about his character in the New Testament, right? There's only a few things that the Bible talks about concerning Solomon. It did mention that Solomon built the temple in the New Testament, but there's one place where Jesus was the one who brought up Solomon. Do you guys remember that episode? And what did he say about Solomon? Right.
Check out the wisdom of Solomon.
Yep, I forgot there was two. That's one of them, is that the Queen of the South came and visited, right? She sought him out, visited Solomon. We'll just leave it at that. There's one other reference, yep.
Not even Solomon clothed himself like the fields.
Yeah. When Jesus was talking to us about worry and about what are we going to eat and what are we going to drink, Jesus reminds us that to comfort us, he says, man, that the lilies of the field, they don't worry about what they wear. and they were dressed way better than Solomon had ever dressed. And the people at the time, when they heard that, they had real images in their mind, because the glory days of Israel were when Solomon was king. I mean, there was not a wealthier kingdom ever in history than when Solomon was king of Israel. And so the grandeur that Solomon displayed, and he is one of those kings where he wasn't just a good king, but he really played it up. So if I was king, my temple would be, or my palace, super simple, right? There wouldn't be a lot. My clothes, it wouldn't be all lavish, because that looks really uncomfortable. It would be a t-shirt, maybe some comfortable pants. You know, my kingdom would not be a kingdom of lavishness. But Solomon just went and covered everything in gold. That's the kind of king that he was. He had jewels. He had all these exotic animals. He would import baboons and all kinds of like peacocks and, you know, all the exotic animals, and brought into the kingdom just for display, so that when people came and visit, they would be like, wow, this guy's got some stuff. If people visited my kingdom, anyway, we won't get into that. So it would be, his splendor and the way that he dressed. But that meant something to the people. And so, but we also know that it wasn't just Solomon here known for his splendor. This guy was in the lineage for the King of Kings, Jesus. And when we talk about Jesus, it's one of those things where, man, God gives us such a huge backstory to help us understand that when Jesus came, it was a big deal. He fulfilled so many prophecies, lined up so many things, and it was impossible for this to have happened without the hand of God. And that's what I find great about looking over the book of Kings. Okay, so Solomon was one. Name another name. Some major prophets. David. Yeah, okay, so David was briefly mentioned at the very beginning. That's why I left room up here. See? I'm a prophet. Yeah, David is huge. He was at the end of his life. But he was the first king, and I like showing how, you know, this is the first succession, because, you know, Saul was technically the first king, but his kingdom was taken away. They started a new one, and then David now is going to show his lineage all the way through to Jesus Christ down here somewhere. But yeah, David's a huge one, and David's references in the New Testament are aplenty. In fact, no, we didn't talk about it this morning. But, so give me another name.
He's not in the New Testament, I don't think, but Jeroboam.
Jeroboam, okay.
Idolater.
I'm going to go ahead and throw in. These are some big names. Neither of these guys are mentioned. Well, he was mentioned in the genealogy. Jeroboam. Okay, this is a bad dude, but this was a good dude turned bad, and I hate stories like that, because, you know, you look at guys and you look at potential. Jeroboam was one of those guys where he worked for King Solomon, and I'm telling you right now, anybody that got a chance to work for King Solomon was a lucky guy, because you know the level of wisdom and discernment that God gave Solomon, right? So imagine being one of his advisors. How are you going to advise the smartest guy? His advisors got to witness him dispensing justice, dispensing discernment across the kingdom for however many years. I forget what it was, but it was a long time, and they got to learn so much from Solomon. And Jeroboam, when he was working for Solomon, was so industrious, top tier guy. When Solomon's heart left God, God took the kingdom away, and he was going to give it to another man. And that other man was Jeroboam. And so I liken Jeroboam a lot to King David. That's what happened with King David. King Saul had the kingdom. He could have had a legacy, but his heart turned from the Lord. He did things wrong. And so God says, the kingdom is taken from Saul and given to another man, David. And David also was that same industrious warrior, valiant. He was the man. And then he proved to be a man after God's own heart. Jeroboam proved not to be. Started off so much. In fact, I won't spoil it, but when we get into reading about Jeroboam, the Bible says that God promised him, if you follow after me, I'm going to make your kingdom last forever too. Like, that's a huge promise. But Jeroboam messes that up, turns to idolatry, forsakes the Lord, and then he starts a legacy where every king after him was terrible. They were all evil kings in Israel. In fact, when those kings come to power, if they do bad, the Bible says they did evil just like this guy. It's like calling your kids Hitler. You know, Hitler sets the stage for us as far as like bad guys go, right? Which is really unfortunate because I can think of a lot more worse guys than Hitler. But, you know, I don't know if you ever want to insult your kids and like, quit acting like Hitler, kids. That would be terrible. Okay. What other characters can you remember from the book of 1st and 2nd Kings? Yeah, Joe. Elijah. Dude, Elijah. We wouldn't know about Elijah without the book of 1st and 2nd Kings, you know? And he was, wow, he's actually mentioned several times in the scriptures. In fact, people thought that Jesus was Elijah because when they were seeing what Jesus was doing, they were saying to themselves, because they knew the prophecies, is this Elijah come back? And Jesus says, nope. And, you know, they thought that he was maybe Jeremiah or some of the other prophets. You know, just who is Jesus? That's how big of an influence Elijah had in that. When Jesus was transfigured, he went up on that mountain. You guys remember that transfiguration? Jesus like changed his appearance. He was glowing white, and then all of a sudden, two figures from the Old Testament appear: Moses and Elijah. And the reason why those two guys appear and having this powwow with Jesus here is that they kind of represent the sum of the law, Moses, and the prophets, Elijah. Elijah's a big deal. And of course, some of the examples of his faithfulness being that he prayed for 3.5 years and it didn't rain. And that's James' example of saying, hey, when you guys pray like Elijah. Because that man can get stuff done in his prayers, right? So Elijah, huge New Testament guy, but we find his story here in 1st and 2nd Kings. So many good things. There's another guy very, very similar to Elijah. I'm sorry? Elisha? Yeah, that's correct. Elisha. Another big player, but he doesn't get mentioned in the New Testament except once. Does anybody remember that episode? Who would have mentioned Elisha? Yeah, Jesus mentions Elisha. I always think that that's a big deal. If Jesus says or does anything, we want to pay attention to that. And so Jesus mentioned the faith of Naaman, the Syrian, which I'll go ahead and throw that name up there. But these guys get honorable mention in the New Testament with the same episode. It was when Elisha healed Naaman, the leper. Okay? Both of those guys, examples of tremendous faith. I mean, Elijah, he's got the cool stories. He's there, 400 prophets of Baal. They're building altars, and he calls forth fire from heaven, and, destroys this altar and burns up not only his altar, but, all kinds of stuff that was around that. Big, powerful battles. Elisha, what do I want to say about Elisha? To me, I don't think he gets enough credit because when Elijah transferred power to Elisha, he says, what do you want? He says, well, I want your power. And he says, okay, if you're here when the Lord takes me, I'll give you a double portion of that power. Okay? And I don't know if you guys remember, but Elijah, the Bible says, was taken up in a tornado or whirlwind of horses and chariots of fire. So imagine that scene coming down. And then taking Elijah away, and Elisha's standing there, and he's like, oh boy, that's a lot of power. And then he realizes that he's going to get that double portion of power. He goes and he does the same thing. He's the guy that called those 2 bears to maul those 42 punk kids that were making fun of his bald head. You guys remember that story? One of my favorites. Raises people from the dead. That's Elisha. Does all kinds of like crazy things where he's like making axe head floats and and like multiplying food, all kinds of stuff. Okay. Any other names that come to mind? Now we're getting into like the weird, obscure ones that you may or may not know.
Jehoshaphat.
Who?
Jehoshaphat is one of my favorites.
Yeah, so Jehoshaphat has a list of kings. So there's going to be a whole list of kings. He's one of them. He's about right here. He's a lot of fun to read about. Did some great things, did some stupid things. But the only time that he's mentioned that I can think of is in the genealogy. So he actually didn't make it into the New Testament. But there's a whole bunch of them. Like Hezekiah, Manasseh, Amon, Josiah. You guys remember good King Josiah? Good boy. All those guys make it into the New Testament, but only as a reference to this is the genealogy of the King of Kings. I'm sorry, what was that?
You want to switch to other things like Abiathar, the priest?
Yeah. So Abiathar actually makes it. Okay. So in my study for all of this stuff, I wanted to be as thorough as I can, and I came across some controversies, and I was like, do I really want to talk to you guys about these controversies? My intention is to be an encouragement, and I don't want to raise any alarms or any bells to where you're like, oh, I can't trust the Bible. But honestly, guys, this is in the Bible. God has said it, and He said this is what it's going to be. So why don't we actually look at that? Since Mr. Luke brought it up, we're going to go there. So Abiathar is, turn with me over to 1 Samuel chapter 20. Okay, Abiathar, 1 Samuel chapter 20. Actually, it's going to be in 21. So in 1 Samuel 21, we have this story where David's on the run from King Saul. And he goes and he's looking for help. He's got a lot of guys to feed. It's got to be all very secretive because he doesn't want to alert King Saul, because if he alerts King Saul will be able to find him, kill him, and that would be very counterproductive to what David's trying to do, because he's trying to be king. Okay? So he gets to Nob, and I'll read verse 21, verse 1. David came to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech came trembling to meet David and said to him, "Why are you alone and no one with you?" So that's who he meets. He has this long conversation. Anyway, he talks to him about like getting some bread from him, the sword of Goliath, things like that to help him on his journey. And Ahimelech gives it to him. Okay? So after that happens and David runs away, Ahimelech, he does all this for the sake of King David, but he wasn't king at the time. Saul finds out. A guy named Doeg the Edomite finds this out, goes and rats him out and tells Saul, "Hey Saul, there's a priest in Nob who's given your boy David supplies." So Saul musters up a bunch of guys, goes down there, and he says, "What's going on, fellas?" And so Ahimelech shows up and he says that who is more faithful to the Lord and to the king than David? That was his defense. He says, if David asks for it, I'm going to give it to him, because there's not a guy more faithful to you and to the kingdom than David. Okay? So Saul doesn't like that answer, and he tells his guys, "Hey guys," his troops that he mustered up, "wipe out everybody in this town." Everybody. The guys wouldn't do it because it feels like it's a bad thing. But not only is it a bad thing, it feels like a bad thing. And so the guys wouldn't do it. So Saul looks to Doeg, the Edomite who ratted him out, and he says, hey, Doeg, you go do it. So Doeg single-handedly kills Ahimelech and all the priests and everybody in that town. That's a bad dude. He does that, and he kills everybody except for one person makes it out alive. And that one person happens to be a guy named Abiathar. I don't know how you say it. But the first time I heard it as Abiathar, I about lost my pants because that sounded like a different person. But anyway, I'm going to say Abiathar. That's how I grew up saying it. He was the son of Ahimelech. And afterwards, he escapes, makes it to David, and he says, David, everybody in the town of Nob is slain. I'm the only one that escaped, and I'm alive. And so David makes Abiathar his priest. And later on, he serves for most of David's kingdom as the high priest. Okay? You guys see what I'm saying? There's that connection there. So Ahimelech is his dad, but he's the guy that actually serves as David's high priest for the time that he's high priest. Okay. Now, the controversy comes in when in the New Testament, let's see. Why don't we turn to Mark chapter 2. Mark chapter 2. People are questioning Jesus about why he's eating and harvesting on the Sabbath day. And so he's talking to the Pharisees. Why don't we start in verse 24? Pharisees were saying to him, "Look, why are you doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And Jesus said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he was in need, and he and his companions became hungry? How he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar the high priest and ate the consecrated bread, which is not lawful for anyone to eat except the priests, and he also gave it to those who were with him." So when Jesus was mentioning the story, he doesn't say Ahimelech. He says Abiathar. You guys see what I'm saying? So is Jesus mistaken? Did he get the wrong guy? Did he not follow up on his history? I don't think that that's the case. So you guys understand the audience that Jesus is talking about. When we talk about David as king, and you talk about the high priest at the time, you're going to mention Abiathar because he's the high priest at the time. And when Jesus says it, he's not saying that David went and talked to Abiathar. What does he say there? He says, how he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar the high priest. Okay? And so the way that I can wrap my mind around this, and maybe this is not a good explanation for you, take it for what it's worth. But, who's the president right now? Donald Trump, right? Do you guys remember the time when President Trump was an actor on TV? Right, there was a time. That's weird to think about, but he was an actor on TV. And when people reference that, and you would even see an episode, you would say, hey, that's President Trump. Was he president at the time? He wasn't president at the time. But in our reference, from a historical standpoint, when we stand here in the present and we look back, the things that we know today affect how we talk about history. And so because Trump is president right now, when we look back in history, when we see him in different pictures, we would say, hey, look, that's President Trump, who wasn't president at the time, but he's still president. So in Jesus' words here, he's talking about how David went and got that consecrated bread, and he entered the house of God. But he's talking about it in the time of Abiathar, the high priest, because Abiathar at one point becomes the high priest. And so in reference to when we talk about Abiathar, we would call him the high priest. That would be appropriate to say. Just like when we talk about President Reagan. You know, President Reagan's gone now, but anytime we refer to him, even in his childhood, oh, there was a time when President Reagan was in high school, and if you saw a picture of him in the yearbook, you say, hey, that's old Ron. No, you just say that's President Reagan, right? And so Abiathar, the priest, actually makes it to the New Testament, but as a side note for King David. But God is using this, Jesus is using this entire episode of David and Abiathar to explain to us the heart of these commands that God gave his people. Was the Sabbath set up, and was it important at the time? Is it important now? Absolutely. All of these things are important, but the thing is, we have a tendency to look for loopholes. We have a tendency to try to oppress other people with our own knowledge. And the heart of the Sabbath was never for us to use it to compulse other people. Isn't that right, Elliot? It was meant for us to understand God's wisdom, God's heart, and it's a benefit to us. That's the whole point of the Sabbath. So I love it when Jesus is able to bring things out. And, you know, you're talking to Pharisees, you're talking to guys who knew the law. When Jesus brings this up, they're like, ooh, that's a good point. That's a good point. I hate that. We need to kill this guy. So they go and they try to kill this guy. Okay. So I don't have, actually I have King David, King Saul, you guys got that. Priest, Elijah, Elisha. Man, those are good ones. Oh. So mostly good guys, some bad guys. There's another bad guy. Ahab is a big one. He doesn't make it to the New Testament, but you guys know his wife? What's his wife's name? Jezebel. You guys all said it with such contempt. That's so crazy. There's a restaurant in Roanoke, Virginia. It's called Scratch Biscuit, my favorite breakfast joint in Roanoke, Virginia, because they have a sandwich called the Jezebel. Okay, I know. I looked at that. I was like, this is sacrilegious. I can't believe I'm even looking at this. But it's good. Huh?
I was going to say, did you try?
Oh, it's what I get every single time. But I make a slight substitution on there. It comes with ham, but I say, I don't want the ham. I want a fried chicken fillet. So they give me a fried chicken fillet, biscuit, pimento cheese, and the Jezebel sauce. And I'm telling you what, when people come visit me in Roanoke, I take them here and I say, hey, we're going to go Scratch Biscuit and we're going to get the Jezebel. Okay? And it sounds crazy, but even the name sounds terrible, right? What is she associated with? Just ickiness, but specifically immorality, idolatry, like anything that you can get. That's murder. Yeah, that's also a big one. She's associated with those things. Okay, in the New Testament, she shows up, but not as Jezebel, this person right here, but there was a woman found in the book of Revelation. Her name was Jezebel, and I'll just read it to you real quick. Revelation 2:20. It's not the same Jezebel. Actually, yeah. Why don't I just read it real quick, because I think it's interesting. You don't have to turn there, but you can if you want to. Revelation 2:20. Let's see here. Jezebel. But I have this against you. You tolerate the woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess, and she teaches and leads my bondservants astray, so that they commit acts of immorality and eat things sacrificed to idols. Again, not the same Jezebel, but it's the same spirit, and it's the same destruction to the people of God. This lady, when she was alive, man, she was destroying God's prophets left and right. She pursued Elijah to the point where Elijah, you guys remember, Elijah got to the point where he was like, there's no one else. She's killed all your prophets, Lord, and now she's coming for me, and there's nobody else. And you guys remember how God comforted Elijah? He says, don't you worry about that. I got 7,000 who haven't bowed the knee. 7,000. 7,000 folks that Elijah thought that there was zero. That's a huge difference, right? It would have been different if God said, don't worry, I've got like 4 or 5 guys in my back pocket, that haven't bowed the knee to Baal. You're good. Look up those guys, maybe get a pickleball session or something like that. But God said, I've got 7,000 folks who haven't bowed the knee to Baal. Don't you worry about this. Okay. So, yep, Jezebel is a big one. Naaman, we got Naaman. Oh, I found another guy. Hezekiah. Yeah, Hezekiah is one of the kings. He actually doesn't show up except for in the genealogy. But he does have a guy that is his good friend. Unless, do you guys know something in the New Testament? Hezekiah? I don't remember Hezekiah in the New Testament. Yeah, but he was definitely in the genealogies. Yeah, so he's over here in this group right here. So we got Jehoshaphat, we got Hezekiah down here. Hezi, we're going to call him Hezi. And then we got Manny. And then we got Amon. And then we got Josiah. Okay, so we got Hezekiah over here. He's part of that. What was I saying? Oh, there's another guy that we find in the New Testament. He gets introduced here in 2 Kings, also a prophet, but good old Jonah shows up. You know, he wasn't just the guy who wrote the book, but he was actually sent by the Lord to go talk to some folks in 2 Kings, and he shows up. And you know, I like it when things that are separated in my mind get brought together. So in my mind, I'm seeing the VeggieTales Jonah. Okay, I get that every time I think about Jonah, and so he did not live during the time of the rough and rugged kings. Jonah lived with like carrots and vegetables, and you know, it was just a very pleasant atmosphere. But Jonah lived during that cutthroat time of all the horrible, evil things that were happening. In fact, I think one of the reasons why Jonah disdained the Assyrians so much was that was around the time when the Assyrians were getting ready to work up and come and destroy all of Israel. Okay, they were one of their number one bad guys, and so his disdain for the Assyrians is right. That racism. Okay, racism is bad. Racism is bad for the cameras. Okay, but you understand it. These people took the Israelites and the brutality, we don't want to get into this, there's kids involved, but the brutality against the Israelite people, Jonah wanted to see them suffer. When God says, hey, I want them to repent so that destruction doesn't come to them, Jonah wanted that destruction to come to them, right? You get where when people offend you and also your family, so it's one thing, I got picked on a lot, you know, growing up as a boy named Sue in the South. Terrible experience. Would not recommend. That's okay. But when people were messing with my kids, that takes me to a different level of like, I want to hurt those people. I get Jonah's angst and anger there with all those. But anyway, Jonah shows up, and interestingly, our Lord Jesus, he's going to give them a sign. And the sign is what? The sign of Jonah. What is the sign of Jonah? Being swallowed by a fish? No, it's the 3 days and the 3 nights. Yep, the 3 days and 3 nights Jesus died, and he was in the grave, in the depths, for 3 days, 3 nights. He comes back up, rises, and is able to finish and accomplish what he needs to do. So, yep, Jonah. Let's see if I got anybody else. I think that's it. I think that those are all the names that I have, other than all of the different kings and the genealogies. And like I said, I wanted this to be as thorough and as exhaustive as I can, because I don't like to miss any things. But if you guys think of anything between now and then, if you're reading through 1st and 2nd Kings, you're like, Sue, you missed, you know, Barzillai or Shimei or Ray or something like that, let me know, and I'd be happy to add that to some future thing. But for right now, Isaiah. That's why I meant to say Isaiah. Yep, Isaiah shows up, and he lives with. He was the prophet during the time of Hezekiah. Does all this stuff, and you guys know Isaiah is quoted like by everybody. Every gospel has Isaiah. Acts, Romans, Peter mentions Isaiah a couple of times. John in the book of Revelation quotes some sections from Isaiah. Dude, Isaiah is a big name, and thank you for catching that. But Isaiah is a good one. We get introduced to Isaiah here And then, of course, you guys know the book of Isaiah. Those are big books. It's cool to see how all the major prophets and minor prophets get dispersed through most of 1st and 2nd Kings. Of course, some of the post-exilic ones aren't going to be in 1st and 2nd Kings because it only goes up to when the temple gets destroyed. So they're going to be slightly behind that. But I want you guys to be encouraged because God really is making a way for us to see that when Jesus comes, there's history behind there. And there's I like it that God makes things make sense. And he puts things together that we would not have otherwise seen. And he has the power to do it. There was a time where I was kind of struggling with my faith because I was like, how do I know this isn't made up? How do I know that? I mean, there are some really talented storytellers out there, you know. And my favorite are when an author comes out with like a book series. And it tells you, you know, here in the beginning, it tells you like a couple of things, introducing you to characters, and then like tells you really weird facts about this character. And you're like, I wonder why she even brought that up, or he even brought that up. And then boom, as the books progress, you're like, oh, that's why they did that. Oh, and then like over here in the last few books, she explains everything about all the books. And you're like, ah, that makes sense. That's so good. You know, that's an incredible story. Okay, how do we know that? How do we know that the Bible, from the beginning to the end, it's creative? There's so much detail. How do we know that some guy didn't make that up? Some guy sitting in a tower and he's like, oh, they're going to love it when I bring Adam and Eve from over here and put them in, you know, the book over here. That's going to be great. That's going to be great, you know. Or the tree of life. I'm going to stick it here in the beginning, and then at the very, very end, I'm going to stick it in there too. Oh, they're going to love that, you know. And then, you know, he's crafting all this stuff. And the thing that really encouraged me during that time, in fact, it was Jay. Jay was talking to me, and my favorite single thing about his proof books was the idea that, say we did start a religion, okay? We're pretty smart people in here. We're pretty religious. We know what makes a good religion, right? Okay? And we're going to call it Judaism, right? It just seems appropriate. And we're going to even predict that, you know, in order to be a part of Judaism, you gotta abide by a few rules. You know, fish tacos on Tuesday, things like that. Like every Tuesday, that's what you gotta eat, and you gotta be nice to your neighbor. Like those are the only rules. Okay, that seems like a great religion. Everyone should be down. Okay, we start spreading this around, and we're telling everybody, hey guys, this is gonna be great. But we're gonna prophesy that Judaism is going to crumble. It's great, but it's not that great. And there's going to be a better religion coming from Judaism. And we're going to set it, and one of these days, Sue has brown eyes, right? One of these days, one of his descendants is going to be born with green eyes. That means he's going to have to start marrying a white girl or something like that, right? For the genes to work out later down the line. And in order to make that work out, when he comes, when that baby born in Bozeman, you know, with green eyes, 1,000 years from now, he's going to usher in a brand new kingdom. Okay, that sounds pretty cool, right? What are the odds that we can actually make that work? Yeah, I was going to say it's pretty slim, but 0 is the right answer. It's so astronomically crazy because we can't even control what's going to happen in 10 years, you know? Like it sounds cool. Judaism sounds really cool, but I can't get you guys to get involved in with my religion, much less the city of Bozeman, you know? And then from there, you know, we're going to, and it can't be Bozeman. My descendant has to be born in Bermuda. Or let's say Bethlehem. Let's say we're going to make him born in Bethlehem. Chances of that happening, 0. And when I was thinking about that, and thinking about the process of how this covers thousands of years of history, and how it all comes together, there's a lot of good and convincing proofs. To me, that was the top one. That God, in His vision, and His wisdom, and His power, was able to carry out not only this group of people, this nation, to bring about a brand new covenant and make it work. And when you really study how the birth of Jesus, just the birth of Jesus fulfills so many prophecies, you sit there and you're like, that is so wild. And what's more fun is after you've learned the story of the birth of Jesus and going back and finding all those references, and every time the city of Bethlehem shows up in the Old Testament, you're like, oh, no way. They're going to freak out when they find out that Jesus is going to come from Bethlehem. You know, no way. When little David, he's out in the fields, he's going to be the great ancestor of the King of Kings. He's going to be king. First of all, that was wild. Nobody saw that coming, but God did. And God knew that David was going to be king and that his great ancestor is going to be the King of Kings. All that stuff is incredibly wild to me.